The sea is a keeper of secrets, some beautiful, some that shatter your world. This is a story of a fisherman whose faith in his father, his hero, crumbled under the weight of a hidden truth. It's about trust, betrayal, and navigating a life adrift. My name's Tariq, I'm 38, and I live in a small fishing village on Morocco's Atlantic coast, where the ocean's roar is the heartbeat of every day. The air smells of salt and diesel, and the horizon stretches like a promise, sometimes kept, sometimes broken. I've been a deep-sea fisherman since I was old enough to grip a net. My life shaped by the tides and the lessons of my father, Hassan. He was larger than life to me, a man whose weathered hands could mend a torn sail or coax a story from the wind. His voice, rough as the cliffs, carried tales of the sea storms that raged like gods, fish that shimmered like jewels, currents that whispered secrets only he could hear. As a boy, I'd sit cross-legged on our splintered porch, the waves crashing below, hanging on his every word. To me, he wasn't just a fisherman. He was the sea's master, my hero, the man who taught me to trust the water and the life it gave us. My mother, Amina, was the anchor of our home, quiet, devout. She'd cook to Jean with whatever we could afford, her hands moving with a grace that made even our leanest days feel warm. We weren't wealthy, far from it. Some seasons, the fish vanished, and we'd scrape by on bread and tea, my mother mending clothes until her fingers bled. But my father's pride in our family, in our legacy as fishermen, held us together. The sea provides, Tariq, he'd say, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Trust it. And trust me. I did. With every fiber of my being, I built my life around his wisdom, following him onto the boats, learning to read the sky's moods, to feel the ocean's pulse. After he died 5 years ago, a heart attack that stole him in a single night, I carried his legacy forward, fishing the same waters, living for the sea he loved. Last summer, that legacy cracked open. I was in our attic, sorting through my father's things, the air thick with dust and memories, his old logbook, its leather cover worn soft, sat in a crate with rusted hooks and faded maps. I flipped through it, tracing his slanted handwriting. When a photograph slipped out, drifting to the floor like a confession, I picked it up, expecting a snapshot of him on his boat, maybe with me as a kid. Instead, it was him in a Spanish port, Cadiz, I'd guess, his arm around a woman I didn't know, a boy about my age at the time clutching his leg. They were smiling, a family frozen in a moment that wasn't mine. My father's handwriting scarred the back. Elena y Mateo, 1995 I was 10 that year, helping my mother stretch every dirham while he was, what? Living another life? My chest tightened, the attic closing in. I told myself it was a mistake, a cousin, a friend's family, but the truth gnawed at me. A few days later, I took the photo to the port, where old fishermen gather like gulls, swapping stories over mint tea. I showed it to Youssef, a port official who'd sailed with my father for decades. His eyes darkened, and he sighed, heavy and slow. Tariq, this was Hassan's other life, in Spain, fighting a sea of emotions. I stood up, the photo trembling in my hand. What do you mean, other life? Youssef looked away, out to the sea, then back at me. He had a woman there, Elena, and a son, Mateo. He split his time, his money, between you and them. I thought you knew. Knew? The word hit like a breaker, pulling me under. My father, the man I'd idolized, had a second family. All those years we struggled. My mother sewing late into the night, me skipping meals to save for gear. He was sending money across the sea, to them, the ocean. My constant, my home, now feels like a liar's mirror, reflecting his betrayal in every wave. I fish alone now, my boat heavy with questions. Who was he? Who am I? Built on his lies. The sea doesn't answer, and neither do I. The days after Youssef's revelation felt like sailing through a fog, everything familiar, yet impossible to navigate. I'd wake before dawn, same as always, and head to my boat, Albar Dash, its hull chipped and salt-stained, a relic of my father's. But the rhythm of fishing, once my anchor, now felt hollow. I'd cast nets into the Atlantic, the waves slapping against the bow, and see that photograph in my mind. My father, smiling with Elena and Mateo, a family I didn't belong to. Each pull of the rope burned with questions. How long had he lived this double life? Did my mother know? Did I ever really know him? I couldn't bring myself to tell my mother, Amina. She's 62 now, her hands gnarled from years of work, her eyes still soft when she talks about my father. She keeps his old fishing hat on a shelf, like a shrine, and sometimes I catch her smiling at it. Lost in memories of the man she loved, telling her would break her, I imagined her face crumpling, her quiet strength dissolving into the same confusion that was eating me alive. So I kept the photo hidden, tucked in my wallet like a wound I couldn't stop touching. Every time I opened it, I half hoped the image would change, that it'd be my mother and me instead. It never was. At the port, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The older fishermen, men who'd known my father, would glance at me with pity when I passed. Did they all know? Had they whispered about Hassan's secret while I hauled fish and boasted about his legacy? I wanted to confront them, demand answers, but shame stopped me. I'd spent my life proud of being Hassan's son, the fisherman who carried his name. Now, I felt like a fool, a kid who'd believed in a myth. My fishing trips grew solitary. I used to go out with a small crew, Hamid and Driss, guys I'd known since we were boys, but I started making excuses, easier to handle alone, I'd say, avoiding their questions. The truth was, I couldn't stand their chatter. Their stories about their own fathers, their normal lives, out on the water, it was just me and the sea. But even that betrayed me. The Atlantic, once my refuge, now mocked me with its vastness. I'd stare into its depths, wondering if it had known my father's secrets all along, carrying him to Spain and back while we waited at home. One night, I couldn't sleep. The photo was burning a hole in my mind, so I drove to the port, the village quiet except for the hum of distant waves. I sat on the dock, the logbook open in my lap, searching for clues. My father's entries were meticulous. Dates, catches, weather, but nothing about Spain, nothing about Elena or Mateo. Then I found it. A page from 1995, the same year as the photo, with a single line in smaller script, almost hidden. Cadiz, paid. Paid what? For what? My mind raced. Was it money for them? A debt? A life we never knew about? I started piecing it together. My father would disappear for weeks, sometimes months, saying he was chasing bigger hauls up the coast or negotiating with buyers in Casablanca. We believed him. Why wouldn't we? But now I saw those absences for what they were. Time spent with his other family, the money we thought went in new nets or boat repairs, the lean months when my mother sold her jewelry to keep us afloat. It was going to them. I felt sick. Not just for me, but for my mother, who had poured her life into a man who split his heart across the sea. By dawn, I was still on the dock, the logbook damp from the mist. A fisherman, old man Khalid, shuffled by, his eyes squinting against the sunrise. You look like your father, sitting there, he said, voice kind but heavy. I wanted to scream. I'm not him. Instead, I nodded, my throat tight. The sea stretched out before me, endless and unyielding, and for the first time, I wondered if I could keep fishing in its shadow. It had been my father's world, but it wasn't mine anymore. Not like this. The weeks that followed felt like wading through a riptide, pulled in every direction but unable to find solid ground. I kept fishing, because what else could I do? The sea was my livelihood, even if it now felt like a stranger. Every morning, I dragged myself to Al-Bardash, my father's old boat. Its name, the sea, now a bitter irony, the creak of the deck, the snap of the sails, the salt spray on my face. They used to ground me, make me feel like I was part of something bigger. Now, they just reminded me of him, of the lie he'd woven into every knot and net. I'd haul in mackerel or sardines, my hands moving on instinct, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying. That photograph, Yusef's words, the logbook's cryptic note, Cadiz, paid. I stopped going to the port's tea stall, where the old fishermen gathered, their glances, their hushed tones when I walked by. It was too much. I could feel their pity, or maybe their judgment, like a hook in my gut. Did they think I was naive for not knowing? Or were they protecting my father's memory, keeping his secret even now? One afternoon, I ran into Driss, my old crewmate, at the market. He clapped my shoulder, his grin wide. Tariq, where you been? Boat's lonely without you. I mumbled something about being busy, but his eyes narrowed, like he could see the storm inside me. I turned away before he could ask more. At home, things were worse. My mother noticed I was quieter, my temper shorter. She'd ask, "What's wrong, Habibi?" While stirring a pot of harira, her voice soft but searching. I'd shrug, say it was a bad catch or a broken net. anything to keep her from the truth. How could I tell her that the man she loved, the man she still prayed for every night, had another family? That he'd split his heart and our money between us and them? She'd light a candle for him on Fridays, whispering blessings for his soul. I'd watch, my chest tight, wanting to smash that candle, to scream that he didn't deserve her prayers, but I didn't. I couldn't break her world like he'd broken mine. I started avoiding her too, spending more time at sea or in the shed behind our house, where I kept my gear. The shed was my refuge, a cramped space filled with coiled ropes, rusted tools, and the smell of tar. I'd sit there, the photograph in my hands, staring at my father's face. He looked happy in that picture, happier than I remembered him with us. Was it real? Did he love them more? The boy, Mateo, had my father's eyes, the same dark intensity one saw in the mirror. Was he a fisherman too? Did he grow up hearing the same stories, believing the same myths about Hassan, the sea's keeper? One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the cliffs overlooking the ocean, the logbook under my arm. The wind howled, carrying the sea salt and secrets. I opened the book again, searching for more clues, anything to make sense of it. I found another entry from 1998. E. Needs more. Sent 2,000. 2,000 what? Dirhams? Euros? It was money we didn't have, money my mother and I scraped by without. I imagined her selling her gold bangle that year, telling me it was just an old thing, her smile tight as she paid for my school books. My father's betrayal wasn't just a secret. It was theft of our trust, our stability, our life. I wanted to hate him, but it wasn't that simple. He was still the man who taught me to tie a fisherman's knot, who carried me on his shoulders when I was too tired to walk home from the port. Those memories clashed with the truth, leaving me dizzy. Like I was caught in a whirlpool, the sea stretched out below the cliffs, black and endless under the stars. I used to think it held all the answers, that my father's spirit lived in its depths. Now, I wasn't sure what lived there, or in me. I gripped the logbook, tempted to throw it into the waves, but I didn't. It was all I had left of him, even if it was a lie. The ocean used to be my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of the waves and the pull of the nets. Now, it was a mirror of my father's deceit, every swell hiding something I couldn't see. I kept fishing, because stopping would mean admitting I'd lost everything, not just my father's memory, but the life I'd built around it. My boat, Al-Bar Dash, felt heavier each morning, as if it carried the weight of his secrets along with my own. I'd sail out before dawn. The village, still asleep, and let the sea swallow my thoughts. But they always came back, sharper, like barnacles cutting into my skin. I started noticing patterns in the logbook, entries that didn't add up. My father's trips to Casablanca or Agadir for supplies, they were too frequent, too vague. One from 2000 read, Spain run, E, urgent, 3000. Another, from 2002, M, school fees, sent 1500. M for Mateo, I assumed. My mother and I had eaten lentils for weeks that year, her hands trembling as she counted coins for the electric bill. I've been proud of our resilience then, thinking we were a team, weathering the sea's lane. Seasons together. Now I saw it for what it was. My father choosing them over us, funneling money we needed to a life he hid across the water. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, not my mother, not my old crew. Hamid called once, asking why I'd ditched them. You sick or something, Tariq? He asked, half joking. I lied, said I was fixing the boat. But my voice cracked, and he didn't push. The village was small, and secrets had a way of leaking like a cracked hull. If I told anyone, it'd reach my mother eventually, so I carried it alone, the photo and logbook my only confidants. I'd sit in the shed at night, the lantern casting shadows on the walls, and read those entries until my eyes burned. Each one was a betrayal, a reminder that the man I'd idolized was a stranger. One evening, I went to the mosque, hoping for clarity. I hadn't prayed much since my father died. His death had shaken my faith, and this secret buried it deeper. The imam, an old man with a gentle voice, noticed me lingering after prayers. Something troubles you, Tariq, he said, not a question. I wanted to spill it all, to ask how you forgive a man who built your world on lies. Instead, I nodded and left, the weight of his gaze following me into the night. The sea became my only outlet. I'd push Albar farther out, chasing deeper waters where the fish were scarcer but the silence was louder. Out there, I could scream into the wind, curse my father, curse myself for believing in him. One day, a storm rolled in. Sudden and fierce, the kind my father taught me to respect. The waves tossed my boat like a toy, and for a moment, I didn't care if it took me. Let the sea have me, I thought. Let it wash away the questions. But then I saw my mother's face in my mind, her quiet strength, and I fought the storm, hauling ropes until my hands bled. I made it back, soaked and shaking, but alive. That night, I dreamed of my father. He was on his boat, waving to me from a distance, but when I got closer, it wasn't him. It was Mateo, the boy from the photo, with my father's eyes. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding like a drum. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between anger and grief. I needed answers, not just scraps from a logbook. I started thinking about Spain, about finding Elena and Mateo. What would I say? Did they know about me? Did they know my father was a man who could live two lives, love two families, and leave one to drown? The idea scared me, but it was a lifeline, a way to face the truth instead of running from it. The sea had taught me one thing: you can't outrun a storm forever. The idea of going to Spain took root like a weed, choking out every other thought. I'd never been farther than Tangier, never needed to. My world was this village, these waters, the life my father had shaped for me. But now, that life felt like a borrowed boat. One I'd been steering without knowing it was built on lies. Finding Elena and Mateo became an obsession, not because I wanted to meet them, but because I needed to understand who my father was. Was he the man who taught me to navigate by the stars, or the one who slipped away to another family, leaving us to scrape by? I needed to see them, to know if they carried the same weight I did. I started planning in secret, hoarding every dirham I could from my catches. The sea was generous that month, as if it pitied me, filling my nets with sardines and anchovies. I'd sell them at the market, pocketing the cash instead of fixing Albar's leaking hull or buying new gear. My mother noticed the extra money, her eyes bright with hope. Maybe we can replace the roof, she said one evening, stirring a pot of couscous. I nodded, guilt twisting my gut. I couldn't tell her I was saving to chase my father's ghost across the sea. She'd ask why, and I'd have no answer that wouldn't break her. The logbook became my map. I pored over it, piecing together my father's trips. He'd marked ports, Cadiz, Algeciras, sometimes Malaga, always with brief notes. Met dash, birthday dash, sent 2500 dash. Each entry was a knife, carving deeper into the life we'd lived. I remembered 2003, when I was 16, begging for a new pair of boots because mine had holes. My mother had cried, saying we couldn't afford it. That same year, my father wrote, school trip, 1,000. Mateo got his trip. I got my mother's. Tears, the anger was a fire now, burning through my memories, turning them to ash. I went back to the port one day, seeking Youssef. He was at his usual spot, checking manifests, his face lined like the cliffs. Tariq, he said, wary, like he knew what was coming. I didn't waste time. Tell me everything, I said, my voice low. The photo in my hand, he sighed, rubbing his temples. Your father. He met Elena in Cadiz, maybe 92. She worked at a fish market. They fell in love, had a son. He'd go there a few times a year, said it was business. Business. The word tasted like salt water. Youssef didn't know much more, just that my father kept it quiet, that Elena and Mateo lived in a small apartment near the port. He loved you both, Youssef said, but I walked away before he could finish. Love didn't split like that, not without leaving scars. I started asking around, discreetly, about boats to Spain. A ferry from Tangier to Algeciras was cheap enough. A day's trip. I could be there and back in a week, maybe less, but what would I do when I found them? Knock on their door and say, I'm the son he left behind? The thought made me sick, but so did staying here, fishing in the shadow of his lies. I'd lie awake at night, the seas hum outside my window, imagining their faces. Did Mateo look like me? Did Elena know about my mother, about our village, our struggles? Or was she as blind as we were? One morning, I found a letter in the logbook, tucked in the back, sealed but yellowed. It was in my father's handwriting, addressed to E dash. I didn't open it, not yet. It felt like a bomb. One wrong move and it'd explode. I kept it in the shed, hidden under a tarp, but it haunted me. Was it an apology? A promise? A confession? I didn't know if I wanted the answers, but I couldn't stop chasing them. The sea had taught me to keep moving, even when the current pulled against you. Spain was my current now, and I was caught in it, whether I liked it or not. By spring, I'd saved enough for the ferry to Algeciras. The decision to go wasn't easy. It felt like betraying my mother, leaving her alone while I chased my father's secrets. But staying was worse, like living in a house built on sand, waiting for it to collapse. I told her I was going to Tangier for a big market, a chance to sell our catch at a better price. She smiled, proud, and packed me a bag of bread and dried figs. Be safe, Tariq, she said, her hands on my cheeks, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, the lie bitter in my throat. I couldn't look at her as I left, the photograph and logbook tucked in my bag, that unopened letter burning a hole in my thoughts. The ferry ride was rough, the sea churning like my mind. I stood on the deck, watching Morocco fade into the mist, Spain a faint line on the horizon. I'd never left my country before, never needed to. The Atlantic had always been enough, my father's domain. Now mine. But as the ferry rocked, I felt unmoored, a man without a compass. What was I even doing? Tracking down a woman and a son who might not know I existed? What if they did? What if they hated me, or worse, pitted me? I gripped the railing, the salt spray stinging my eyes, and tried to focus on the horizon, the way my father taught me when the sea got rough. Algeciras was loud, chaotic, nothing like my village. The port smelled of oil and fish, boats crammed together, voices shouting in Spanish. I wandered, the photo in my pocket, asking dockworkers if they knew an Elena who worked at a fish market years ago. Most shrugged, but an old man, his face creased like driftwood, nodded slowly. Elena Vargas, he said, pointing me to a market near the waterfront. She's still there, I think. Good woman. He didn't mention a son, and I didn't ask. My heart was pounding too hard to form the words. The market was a maze of stalls, fish glistening under harsh lights, vendors calling out prices. I found her behind a counter, a woman in her late 50s, her hair streaked with gray, her hands quick as she scaled a fish. She looked like the photo. Older but still sharp-eyed, her smile easy as she chatted with a customer. I stood frozen, clutching the photo, unable to move. This was Elena, the woman my father loved, the woman he chose alongside my mother. I wanted to hate her, but she looked ordinary, like any Annie in my village, working hard, living her life. Did she know about us? Did she know what he'd done? I didn't approach her that day. I couldn't. Instead, I wandered to a cafe nearby, the logbook heavy in my bag. I pulled out the letter, my hand shaking as I broke the seal. It was short, in my father's slanted script. Elena, I'm sorry. I can't keep this up forever. I love. The rest was smudged, the ink blurred by time or water. I stared at it, my chest tight. Love who? Her? Mateo? Us? The letter gave no answers, just more questions, like the sea itself. I tucked it away, my eyes on the market, watching Elena from a distance. She laughed with a vendor, her voice carrying over the crowd, and I wondered what my father saw in her. What made him split his life in two? I spent the night in a cheap hostel, the sound of the port keeping me awake. I thought about Mateo, the boy who shared my father's eyes. Was he here, in Algeciras? Did he fish, like me, carrying the same legacy I thought was mine alone? The idea of meeting him terrified me, but I couldn't leave without knowing. I'd come too far, crossed an ocean for this. The sea had always demanded courage, and now it was asking for more than I thought I had. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the market. Tomorrow, I'd face her, or him, or both. I just didn't know if I was ready for what I'd find. Morning came too fast, the Algeciras sun harsh through the hostel's thin curtains. I lay there, the letter's words echoing. I'm sorry, I can't keep this up forever. Sorry for what? For loving too many people, or for lying to us all? I wanted to crumple the paper, toss it into the sea, but it was my only link to the truth. I dressed, my hands clumsy, and headed back to the market, the photo and logbook in my bag like anchors dragging me forward. The air was thick with the smell of fish and salt, the crowd louder than yesterday. I found Elena's stall again, my heart hammering as I watched her work, her movements quick and sure, like my mother's when she cleaned fish at home. I don't know what I expected, some sign of guilt, maybe, or a shadow of my father in her face, but she was just a woman, selling mackerel, laughing with customers. I stood there, a stranger in her world, trying to find the courage to speak. What do you say to someone who shared your father, who might not even know you exist? I rehearsed the words in my head. I'm Tariq, Hassan's son. But they stuck in my throat, heavy as wet rope. Before I could move, a man approached her stall, maybe 30, carrying a crate of fish. He had dark eyes, my father's eyes, and my stomach dropped. Mateo. It had to be. He called her Mama, his voice warm, and helped her stack the crates. They moved together easily, like a team, the way I used to with my father. I watched, frozen, as he joked with a customer, his laugh sharp and familiar. It was my father's laugh. The one that used to fill our porch on good days. I felt like I was drowning, the market's noise fading to a dull roar. This was the son my father chose to spend time with, to send money to, while my mother and I counted coins. I wanted to hate him. But he looked too much like me, like a mirror I didn't want to face. I stepped forward, my legs moving before my mind caught up. Elena, I said, my voice rougher than I meant. She looked up, her smile polite but curious. Yes, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I pulled out the photo, my fingers trembling, and held it out. Do you know this man? Her eyes widened, just for a second, before her face softened. Hassan, she whispered, like a prayer. She took the photo, her fingers brushing mine, and looked at me. Really looked. You're his son, she said. Not a question. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She gestured to a bench behind the stall, and I followed. Mateo watching us, his expression unreadable. I knew he had a family in Morocco, she said quietly, her accent thick but clear. He told me, years ago, said he loved you, but he couldn't leave you. Couldn't leave us? He did. Every time he crossed the sea, I wanted to scream, but her eyes were sad, not guilty. He loved Mateo too, she said, glancing at her son, who was still staring. He tried to be there for both of you. Mateo stepped closer, his jaw tight. Who are you? He asked, his voice sharp. I told him, the words spilling out, my name, my village, the logbook, the money we never had. His face hardened, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked at his mother. Then back at me. He was my father too, he said, almost a challenge. I nodded, because what else could I do? We were two sides of the same lie, two sons carrying the same weight. Elena reached for my hand, her grip warm, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready for her kindness, not when it felt like pity. I left the market, my head spinning. They weren't the enemy I'd imagined, just people, like me, caught in my father's web, but knowing that didn't ease the ache. The sea was waiting for me back home, and so was my mother, still in the dark. I had to decide what to carry back with me, anger, truth, or something else entirely. The ferry back to Morocco felt like crossing a chasm, the sea stretching between who I was and who I'd become. Algeciras faded behind me. Elena and Mateo's faces burned into my mind. I'd gone looking for answers, but found only more questions. Elena's words, he loved you both, echoed like a tide, pulling me one way, then another. Loved us both? How do you love two families, two lives, and keep them both in the dark? Mateo's eyes, so like my father's, so like mine, haunted me. He wasn't my enemy, but he wasn't my brother either. We were strangers bound by a man who'd split himself in two. On the ferry, I opened the logbook again, tracing my father's handwriting. The entries, E, paid, M, school fees, weren't just betrayals now. They were choices, choices that left my mother sewing late into the night, me patching nets with frayed rope. I thought about Elena, her quiet sadness, and Mateo, his defensive stance, like he was guarding his own version of our father. They didn't know about our struggles, just like we didn't know about theirs. My father had built two worlds, and neither was whole. I wanted to hate him, but grief kept getting in the way. He was still the man who taught me to fish, who carried me home when I fell asleep on the boat. How do you untangle love from lies? Back in the village, the air felt heavier, the sea louder. I went straight to the shed, avoiding my mother's questions about the market. She'd cooked for me, a steaming tagine, her smile warm but worried. You look tired, Habibi, she said, brushing my cheek. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The truth was a weight I couldn't share. Not yet. I needed to understand it first, to make sense of the man who'd shaped us both. In the shed, I sat with the letter again, its smudged words mocking me. I'm sorry, I can't keep this up forever. I wondered if he'd meant to leave one of us, or both, or neither. Maybe he was as lost as I was. Now, I went back to fishing, but it was different. The sea wasn't my father's anymore. It was mine, or it could be. I started noticing things I'd ignored. The way the gulls followed my boat, the shift of the current before a storm. I'd spent so long living in his shadow, chasing his legacy, that I'd forgotten to build my own. One morning, I took Albar out alone, the dawn painting the water gold. I didn't cast nets, just drifted, letting the sea carry me. For the first time, I felt a flicker of peace, like I could be more than Hassan's son, more than the boy betrayed. I decided not to tell my mother, not because I was protecting her, but because the truth wouldn't change her love for him. She deserved her memories, flawed as they were. I'd carry the secret, like I carried the logbook, a heavy but private burden. Mateo and Elena were part of my father's story, but not mine, not anymore. I wrote them a letter, short and unsigned, and mailed it to the market. I'm sorry for what he did. I hope you find peace. I don't know if they'll read it or care, but it felt like closing a door. The sea is still my home, though it'll never feel the same. It's not my father's domain, not a liar's mirror. It's just the sea, vast and unyielding, ready to teach me if I listen. I'm learning to trust it again, to trust myself. My father's betrayal cost me my certainty, my sense of who I was. But it gave me something too, a chance to rebuild, to fish for myself, not for him. I don't know if I've forgiven him, but I'm starting to forgive the boy who believed in him. That's enough for now.